This video is going to talk about how to utilize the sculpting tool on Nurbs objects. So the first thing I'm going to do is add myself a Nurbs sphere and enlarge the sphere and move it off to the side. Now for point of example or for sake of reference, I'm going to also add myself another sphere, another Nurbs sphere, increase the size and move it off to the side. Now the sphere that I originally created, we're going to leave it as it is. The second sphere, I'm going to select it, come over to the channel box under Make Nurbs Sphere, and notice how the default setting for a Nurbs sphere is 8 sections and 4 spans. I'm going to increase both of these to 20 and 20. Okay. Now, if you are familiar with a polysphere, this looks very similar to a polysphere. However, there's still a line separating the two sides, and I still have the ability to not have the sphere completely closed. So this truly is still a Nurbs sphere. All right. But I wanted to show you the differences between the two in case you didn't understand why the Sculpt geometry tool wasn't working on your polysphere, on your Nurbs sphere that we have on the left versus the Nurbs sphere on the right. All right, so what we're going to do is have your sphere selected. So I'm going to start with the one that I've increased all the sections and subdivisions on it. Go up to the Surfaces menu and go down to the Options box next to Sculpt Geometry Tool. Now having the Options box show is critical. Over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to click on the Reset tool that takes you back to the default settings. So, okay, I should say having your Nurbs sphere selected prior to opening up the options box for the Sculpt geometry tool is critical because the Sculpt geometry tool needs to know what it's going to be sculpting before you trigger the tool. All right, so at the very top here, let's talk about some of the different settings. As you can see, I'm hovering over my Nurbs sphere and I have a decent sized brush. That brush might be too big, it might be too small. Hold down your B as in brush key and then you can left mouse click and drag and make it smaller. You'll see that there's a decimal showing there that looks like 0.4143. When I come over here to my my properties, this is what it just decreased, was the actual brush size, the radius U. Okay. Next thing is down here under the profile. I'm going to leave the brush set to soft brush. We'll talk more about these tools as we get into polygons later on. So for the time being, I'm going to leave it as a soft brush. The next thing are the sculpt parameters. You'll see that the first one is a push, the second one is a pull. This is basically the two tools that you need to know about this tool, as well as the erase tool for any mistakes that you make. Now the push and the pull is basically the ability for you to adjust the placement of the control vertices of the object that you're sculpting. Now moving down where it says reference vector, this is going to be based upon the normals. The normals are itty bitty little lines that are coming out of the different surfaces, the different faces of your object based on the angle that we're looking at it. So as you can see, as I hover over these different surfaces, the angle of that arrow will adjust and change. That is the face normal that we're dealing with. You'll also see that my operation is specified to push. That means that as I'm hovering over these different faces, that arrow is pointing downward, meaning it's going to push into the actual object. If I change this to pull, it's going to pull them outward. And again, you'll see the arrows coming in the outward direction. If we were to change the reference vector from normal to, let's say, over here, I'm looking at this from the z-axis. Okay, so if I change this to the z-axis, anything that I push or pull out of this is always going to go into the world axis of z. So do you see how the angle of the arrow is not adjusting based on what it is that I'm scrubbing over? Versus when I go to normal, it always will change to the angle of the face. Hopefully that better explains things. All right, so we're going to leave it as normal. I've got my brush size a nice size small. And the last thing is the max displacement. This max displacement is setting it to 1 unit of size. 1 unit of size is basically the amount that you can push or pull a particular set of control vertices, or in this case the surfaces, is the size of 1 unit. And the unit is basically showing here on your grid. So let's leave this as max displacement is set to 1. And then we'll also want to leave on update on each stroke. So I'm going to go through and start creating myself, let's say, an S. So I'm going to draw an S. I'm going to click and drag and come through down here. It's not the best looking S, but you kind of see that I've got an S being created, and it's going to pull it off into those directions that we just mentioned based on the normals of the faces that we're looking at, the surfaces. Okay, so it's an okay looking S. It doesn't look great. I've got some other ones over here that I could probably pull out. To further emphasize the fact that I'm trying to create an S, I can always push instead of pull, and this will push it inward. And so then these faces I can further push in to emphasize that I'm creating an S, and then these faces also, or these surfaces, I can also push inward as well. Okay, so therefore this is how I've destroyed my my Nurbs sphere into this non-understood or visible object here. All right, I'm going to go back to my Q key and select the other Nurbs sphere that we created. And as you can see, when I press the F key, it becomes the frame or the focus. And once again, the differences between these two is that they both were Nurbs spheres. However, the one on the right, I increased the number of sections and spans to 20 by 20. And in this particular example, I have not. All right, so that being said, let's once again open up the exact same tool under Surfaces. Go down to Sculpt Geometry Tool Options box. And let's see if I decrease my brush size to what we had on the other one, which was 0.4. As I scrub over this particular sphere, you can see it's making adjustments, but it's also doing it in a very obtuse manner because there's not very many surfaces and control vertices to adjust. So I don't have the attention to detail in this particular example that I had on the other one when there was far more surfaces to play around with. That being said, you could very easily take this object, maybe rotate it into position, and make this into a nice little bing bag chair or something of that nature. So further push this in. Right, and so you can kind of see where that's going with that. So this is how you utilize the Sculpt Geometry tool. Hopefully that's beneficial and useful to you in understanding how to morph an object utilizing a very fun paintbrush-like tool versus getting into the actual control vertices and adjusting, moving them one by one. This basically does the exact same thing, but the paintbrush makes it a little bit more fun and visual as you go along. Hopefully this video helped.